Welcome to Days of Roar, the Detroit Tiger podcast, brought to you by the Detroit Free Press. My name is Mark Gorash. I am here with Free Press beat writer Evan Petzold on a Santa Claus week. Merry Christmas to everyone. Hope you're enjoying spending time with your family, or if you're not enjoying spending time with your family, we hope you can find a private location to get some sanity. Not a lot happening on This Week in Baseball. A lot happening in the personal lives of Evan Petzold and Mark Gorash. Ev, how you doing?
I'm doing well, man. My wife and I, we moved into our first home. So if you remember from the Greece story that I told, we delayed our honeymoon to save for a house, and we ended up saving for both at the same time. And then we pretty much did both at the same time as well. So we bought a house and have spent the last 3 or 4 days getting moved in. On top of that, my dad and I, we remodeled the basement. There was already a bar, a mini fridge, and a sink down there, and we bought the house, but we removed the drop ceiling, removed the fluorescent lights, cleaned up a bunch of wires, insulated some pipes. We installed canned lights. We also did the electrical for that. We ripped out the carpet, and then we hired Drew from Oak Painting to spray the ceiling black, giving it that industrial look. It turned out great. We still have to paint the walls, get new flooring, but the basement is coming along nicely. Shout out to my dad for helping with that. Would not have been able to do it without him. And then also spent like 2 days inhaling dust down there in the basement. So I lost my voice and I'm still recovering from that a little bit, but it was well worth it because of how good it looks down there. So that's coming along. And then also shout out to my family, shout out to Savannah's family for helping us move. We had all hands on deck. It made the process super easy. We had both of our parents, all of our siblings, and all of the significant others. It was a full team Petzold / Dinkowski effort. So yeah, that's been my life for the last 4 days.
I can say that I have supervised many a building project, if people know what I have done in my second career. And I've seen pictures and it looks outstanding. I saw the before, I saw the after. I'm loving it. The busy part of my life, I have been graced with another grandson, 8 pounds, 2 ounces, 22 inches. I now know what the rest of my life is looking like. Shout out to my kids, Jordan and Samantha. Thank you so much for bringing so much joy to my life. So been a busy week for both of us.
Hey, and a busy week in baseball too. Let's not sleep on that either. Now, not a busy week for the Tigers, busy week for us, not a busy week for the Tigers. But a busy week in baseball. Like, a lot has happened since last week's episode, Mark, when you really look at it. And yes, it's not all about the Detroit Tigers, but around the league, a lot of things that maybe impact the Detroit Tigers. When you look at the New York Yankees going out and getting Cody Bellinger from the Chicago Cubs, the Oakland Athletics signed old friend Gio Urshela. The Houston Astros signed Christian Walker to a 3-year, $60 million contract. The New York Yankees signed Paul Goldschmidt to a 1-year, $12.5 million contract. The Arizona Diamondbacks acquired Josh Naylor from the Cleveland Guardians. So there's an AL Central shakeup for you. And then the Cleveland Guardians immediately pivot and they go sign Carlos Santana to a 1-year, $12 million contract. So they trade Josh Naylor only to then sign Carlos Santana. The Philadelphia Phillies, they acquired Jesus Luzardo from the Miami Marlins. The Washington Nationals acquired Nathaniel Lowe from the Texas Rangers. The New York Mets signed Sean Manaea to a 3-year, $75 million contract. The Texas Rangers signed Jock Peterson, and now the Boston Red Sox have signed Walker Buehler. It's a 1-year, $21.05 million contract, which is what the qualifying offer was. So Walker Buehler to the Boston Red Sox. Definitely a lot of action around the league, a lot of action in our own personal lives, especially over the last few days. But the Tigers still haven't done anything aside from signing Alex Cobb to a 1-year, $15 million contract. That happened back at the winter meetings in Dallas. What does Santa need to bring the Tigers, Mark? That's question one of the big two. What does Santa need to bring the Detroit Tigers for Christmas? Let's jump right into it. Is it Alex Bregman? Is it somebody else? Is it a Yandy Diaz trade? Like, the Tigers, obviously, they still need to make some upgrades and some improvements. A lot is happening around the league, but nothing's really going on with the Detroit Tigers right now.
Well, question one of the big two, what does Santa need to bring to the Detroit Tigers for Christmas? I'm going to pivot back from players to the single most important thing, and we need to take some perspective on that. This pains me to say, because I'm sure this is exactly what Scott Harris is saying. And it's rare when Scott Harris and Mark Gorash are on the same page about something, but single most important thing Santa needs to bring the Detroit Tigers for Christmas, number one, is good health to all their players. Because if all their players have good health, I think we're being short-sighted as much as we want them to tweak the roster and improve it. Let's not forget, when you finish on a 33-11, really 36-14 run in your last 50 games, you're pretty damn good. And then you won a playoff series. So if all your players can maintain good health, you're going to have a pretty good baseball team. The second thing I think they need to have and hope they have is some luck. You need some good luck. Can't have injuries. Can't have guys go into prolonged slumps. You need player development. You need guys to get better. So you need Riley Green maybe to have a borderline MVP year. You need Tarek Skubal to stay healthy. You need Reese Olson to stay healthy. You need maybe Casey Mize to learn how to throw a splitter that gets people out. You need Alex Cobb to stay healthy. If all those things happen, they're going to be pretty good, regardless of whether they add players or not. Now, when you look at those first two things, those are at the top of my list for Santa to bring the Detroit Tigers. What's on your list, Evan Petzold?
Well, I want to comment on what you're saying with the health piece, and then also, with the luck factor as well. You're absolutely correct about the health piece of all this, right? We talked about Alex Cobb. The Tigers just signed him 1 year, $15 million contract. That can go up to $17 million if he unlocks some incentives. $1 million for 140 innings, $1 million for 150 innings. So if he stays healthy, he's going to cash in. We've talked a lot about his injury history, over the last couple of episodes with the Tigers signing him, but I really look at four guys for me. It's Tarek Skubal, it's Riley Green, it's Kerry Carpenter, and it's Jackson Jobe. Those are the four guys that I really need to see stay healthy in 2025. The Tigers, without Riley Green and Kerry Carpenter at times last season, that's when they struggled the most. Like, you go back and you look at the last couple of years when the Tigers have been down and they've been bad, it's because Riley Green hasn't been healthy, Kerry Carpenter hasn't been healthy, or both haven't been healthy at the same time. For Tarek Skubal, it's 2 elbow injuries in his career. He had the Tommy John surgery in 2016, the flexor tendon surgery in 2022. And in 2024, he won the American League Cy Young Award. He was the first AL Triple Crown winner in a full season since Justin Verlander in 2011. He was best pitcher in baseball. He posted a 2.39 ERA with a 4.6% walk rate and a 30.3% strikeout rate across 192 innings in 31 starts. He made the All-Star game for the first time in his 5-year career. So there is injury history there, and there's also greatness there. And you gotta stay healthy to be great. There's no doubt about that. I think Tarek Skubal can do it, but again, if you don't have Tarek Skubal, what do you really got? And then you go to Riley Green, and it's right foot fracture in 2022. That required surgery. Left fibula stress reaction in 2023. Right elbow sprain in 2023. That required Tommy John surgery. And then right hamstring strain in 2024. And then you look at the production in 2024. He led qualified Tigers hitters with a 135 WRC plus and 827 OPS. Made the All-Star game for the first time in his 3-year MLB career. He's only getting better. I'm not sure if he will ever be a superstar MVP caliber player, but I think he's a multi-time All-Star type player. That's Riley Green. And to be a multi-time All-Star player, you got to stay healthy. You got to stay on the field. Kerry Carpenter, he had a right shoulder sprain in 2023. He had a lumbar spine stress fracture that kept him out for a long time in 2024. Also, hamstring injury in the 2024 postseason. He's healthy now. But in 2024, when you look at what he did, yes, he had just under 300 plate appearances. So he wasn't considered a qualified hitter based on, what it would take to win the batting title and stuff like that. But still, he hit 284 with 18 home runs, a 7.4% walk rate, and a 25.3% strikeout rate in 87 games. He had a 994 OPS against right-handed pitchers, which ranked 5th in MLB behind only Aaron Judge, Shohei Ohtani, Bobby Witt Jr., and Juan Soto among players with at least 250 plate appearances. He is one of the best hitters in baseball against right-handed pitchers. Again, it was a 994 OPS against right-handed pitchers for Kerry Carpenter. So one of the best hitters in baseball against righties. He needs to stay healthy for the Tigers to be successful. He mashes against righties. Obviously, you see a lot of righties, more righties than lefties in the league. The Tigers need Kerry Carpenter healthy. And then you pivot to Jackson Jobe, who In 2024, he makes his MLB debut out of the bullpen, also pitches in the postseason out of the bullpen. He is a lock for the starting rotation as long as he shows some level of competence in spring training. He's the best pitching prospect in baseball, former number 3 overall draft pick, only 22 years old. He posted a 2.36 ERA with 96 strikeouts in 91 2/3 innings in the minor leagues last season. It's a high velocity fastball, a nasty changeup, a high spinning slider. He has all the tools to be elite. He just needs to throw strikes by challenging hitters with his best stuff inside the zone. If he does that, he can emerge as a legit number 2 or number 3 starter in 2025. I mean, that's not bad behind Tarek Skubal. You'd have a 3-headed monster of Skubal, Jackson Jobe, and Reese Olson. I really like the chances of that happening. Obviously, Jackson Jobe has to take that step with the performance, but he also has to stay healthy. He had the lumbar spine inflammation in 2023. He had the hamstring strain in 2024. He needs to stay healthy in 2025. So when you look at Jackson Jobe, Kerry Carpenter, Riley Green, all 3 of those guys have been injured in the past. Tarek Skubal obviously has had the elbow injuries in the past, but he hasn't been hurt as recently. Those guys all dealt with injuries in 2024 aside from Skubal, but all 4 of them have to stay healthy in 2025, I think, for the Tigers to be as successful as they want to be and to win the American League Central. And then the luck piece of all this, Mark. Does it get any more lucky than a 31-11 run to clinch a spot in the postseason, all while the Minnesota Twins have a historic collapse? Remember, the Tigers were on pace for 75 wins before the improbable final month and a half of games. It was shaping up to be the worst record in A.J. Hinch's 4-year tenure as the manager, and then they went on the run. And not only did the Tigers have to get red hot, but the Twins had to completely fall apart. If the Twins would have just played 500 baseball down the stretch, the Tigers would not have made the postseason. We would have been talking about it as like, wow, what a fun run, but just wasn't enough in the end. But the Twins absolutely fell apart. So the Tigers might have used up all of their luck in 2024. I'm not sure if Santa can bring any more luck in 2025 after what we saw at the end of 2024, but we'll see what happens. And then for the player standpoint of all this and what maybe they could do to upgrade the roster, Alex Bregman, yes, please. They need a right-handed hitter. It's a middle-of-the-order bat. He's going to balance out the roster because of the fact that he is a right-handed hitter. He's an above-average defender at third base. Mark, you've said this before. He's a Scott Harris type of player because of the high contact rate, high walk rate, and low strikeout rate. He's an A.J. Hinch type of player because he's a winner and he's a leader. He fits the clubhouse culture, would be a great example for so many young players in that room. And then growth from the young core of players, especially from the young position players. I'm looking at Colt Keith, Parker Meadows, Dylan Dingler, Wenso Perez, maybe Trey Sweeney, maybe Jace Young. I'm not sure how much room to improve there is for those 2 guys. I'd like to see all of them take steps forward, of course, but I think there is a lot left in the tank for Colt Keith from the power production standpoint. I want to see Parker Meadows over a full season. Dylan Dingler, when he makes contact, he hits the ball really, really hard. I think he can be a dangerous hitter once he kind of figures out, okay, what's my plan? What's my approach? Let's get comfortable in the big leagues, standing in the batter's box. I think Dylan Dingler can be dangerous from the power standpoint. And then Wenso Perez, we saw what he could do in the outfield. I want to see him dabble with the infield a little bit. I think if he could become a true, multi-positional utility player as opposed to just a right fielder would be beneficial. He's not a center fielder. Yes, he can play left field as well, but I want to see him playing maybe a little bit of shortstop, second base, third base. I'd like to see him expand that versatility a little bit. So when it comes to growth from young players, I'm looking at Colt Keith, can hit for more power. Parker Meadows, let's see it over a full season. We know the defense is elite. Dylan Dingler hits the ball really hard. Let's make some more contact, some better swing decisions, have a good approach at the plate. Wenso Perez, some more versatility, and then we'll see what we get from Trey Sweeney and Jace Young. I think you hit the nail on the head with all those things, Mark, when it comes to the health factor, the luck factor, growth from young players, and then we'll see what the Tigers do if they go out and make some moves, whether it's an Alex Bregman or a Yandy Diaz or maybe some, smaller deals that maybe could help them improve in the margins. We'll see what avenue they take.
Well, first of all, how much coffee did you drink this morning? Holy smokes, that was amazing.
A little too much, man. A little too much.
All right. So I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to really think about it. From the first week of August to the first week of September 2024, who was the straw that stirred the drink for the Detroit Tigers?
Give it to me.
Parker Meadows. Parker Meadows made everything better, baby. Okay? He was like bacon. So with his glove, with his speed, with his bat, he impacted winning more than any everyday player on the field for the Detroit Tigers. I think we miss that a little bit. I think we forget how important he was in launching their success. And I think we need to see a lot more of that for a lot longer next year. I sometimes think we don't understand how important he was as a catalyst for them transitioning from being occasionally good to consistently good. As far as what they need to add, I gotta think they're thinking about something, because I sure don't want a first baseman who has a career 95 WRC plus. I looked at a list of OPS for first baseman in Major League Baseball yesterday. The Detroit Tigers ranked 26th and not real good. With I forget what the OPS was, but it was maybe like 651. Pretty terrible from a power position. And, it's been too many years the Detroit Tigers saying to themselves, we could be pretty good if this guy was good. Yeah, well, that's been going on for a decade, if the guy was good, to make their team better. They need to get players that are good. Yandy Diaz, he didn't have a bad year. He did not have a stellar year. Guess what? He had a 120 WRC plus in a non-stellar season. Okay. Tampa, I'm sure they're real eager to have a discussion with the Detroit Tigers for an arm or a player to send away the $10 million contract of Yandy Diaz to the Detroit Tigers. Everybody doing things except Twins and the Tigers. The Tigers need to start making their team better. They're not going to wave a magic wand and a smile and, a lot of hope. They need to do things. That's what big boys do. They do things. They make their team better. They take some risk. The idea that Walker Buehler just got $21 million to sign for Boston. Boston's done more things by mistake than the Tigers have done on purpose. All right, let's transition to question 2 of the big 2. Are the Tigers going to stick with Spencer Torkelson at first base? Lots of first basemen getting traded, signed. Tigers haven't done anything. Break it down for me from the inside out.
Yeah, a lot's been going on around the league at the first base position. Nathaniel Lowe traded to the Washington Nationals. Christian Walker signs with the Houston Astros. Josh Naylor traded to the Arizona Diamondbacks. Carlos Santana signs with the Cleveland Guardians. Paul Goldschmidt signs with the New York Yankees. Jake Berger traded to the Texas Rangers. Who else is out there? Well, right-handed hitting first baseman. You got Pete Alonso, Yuli Gurriel, Josh Bell, Ty France, Jose Abreu. Aside from Pete Alonso, those names aren't really that encouraging on the free agent market. And then, you can't forget about Yandy Diaz on the trade market. The Tampa Bay Rays are willing to move him. He's owed $10 million in 2025 with a $12 million team option for 2026. You also have internal options. Colt Keith and Justin Henry Malloy are getting reps at first base. I think that applies some pressure to Spencer Torkelson. It allows for fallback options without having to commit years or money to a different player, such as 3 years to Christian Walker or $12 million to Carlos Santana. So you have Spencer Torkelson. He's a 2020 number 1 overall pick. Tigers have invested a lot in him over the years. I don't think he deserves to have the job handed to him. And the Tigers haven't said that. Like, they said that he needs to earn the job in spring training. So maybe Torkelson has to earn the job in spring training, and maybe plan B is Colt Keith, not Yandy Diaz. Because obviously plan B wasn't Paul Goldschmidt or Carlos Santana, 2 guys who signed 1-year deals. Maybe that's kind of the thought process there is Torkelson has the opportunity, and if not, we got to pivot to Colt Keith, who's going to move to first base at some point in his career anyway. Or maybe Justin Henry Malloy. I have doubts that he can actually stick at first base. He couldn't stick at third base. He can't play either corner outfield position. I don't really know why I should just suddenly believe that he can play first base. I understand you got to give it a go and try it out, but he has not shown any ability to play any defensive position whatsoever in his professional career. So I'm not going to just say, oh yeah, he's a lock to play first base. I don't think that's that easy to say with Justin Henry Malloy. I do think Colt Keith, though, could be a good first baseman. So maybe that's plan B. We also have to remember Torkelson hit .248 with 6 home runs, an 11.3% walk rate, and a 32.5% strikeout rate in 38 games to finish last season after coming back from AAA Toledo. It was a 781 OPS and a 125 WRC plus in 38 games after coming back from AAA Toledo. I don't like the 32.5% strikeout rate, but he was drawing walks at an 11% clip. He had the 781 OPS. also had a 125 WRC plus. I'm not saying that we should be confident in Torkelson moving forward because of those numbers, but at the same time, those are not bad numbers for a guy making like $760K on the MLB minimum salary. But it also feels like the Tigers would be settling if they simply ran it back with Torque. I also bet the Tigers will be making their decision based on what they're hearing from hitting coaches Michael Bredar and Keith Beauregard as Torkelson's hitting program ramps up ahead of spring training. Both Bredar and Beauregard, I believe, live in Arizona, and they check in with a lot of the guys who live in Arizona during the offseason, which includes Spencer Torkelson, Kerry Carpenter, and a handful of other guys. So the Tigers have been outspoken about the fact that Torkelson needs to make adjustments on offense and defense. And they haven't seen enough of those adjustments because they're still talking about the fact that he needs to make adjustments. That's why they sent him down in Boston last year after that series. They decided we haven't seen enough. He's not progressing. We got to send him down. It's been 3 years and the Tigers are still talking about Torkelson needing to make adjustments. Maybe this is the final straw. If he makes adjustments, the Tigers give him runway with Colt Keith as plan B. If he doesn't make adjustments, the Tigers pivot and they trade for Yandy Diaz. But either way, like they're running out of players to sign or trade for at the first base position, which makes me wonder if the ultimate plan is just to give Torkelson runway with Colt Keith as plan B and kind of see how things shake out. And if you get to the trade deadline and you have a chance to, make some noise and get into the playoffs, maybe that's when you pivot and you make a trade for a first baseman. Maybe at that point, the Toronto Blue Jays are out of the playoff race at the trade deadline and they're willing to trade Vlad Jr. Then do the Tigers pivot and do they get Vlad Jr. for a playoff run? Like I could see something like that happening if the Tigers do go with let's go with Spencer Torkelson, Cole Keith is plan B. We'll leave our options open at the trade deadline if we need to make a move. But I don't know if they really want to commit to anything right now. And we haven't seen them do that so far. There have been many options for them on the trade and free agent markets, and they haven't made a move yet. And I also keep going back to what President of Baseball Operations Scott Harris said about the first base position at the GM meetings in early November. He essentially said the performance has to change, but that doesn't mean the personnel has to change. So maybe the personnel, that means Torkelson, isn't actually going to change.
I got to tell you, we've been talking about Spencer Torkelson for 3 years. I will say, 2 years ago in spring training, we watched Spencer Torkelson. He looked like a different player. And all he did was hit the ball hard. Hit the ball hard in spring training. He looked more athletic. Started the season hitting the ball hard. Didn't necessarily have very much good luck. However, all of a sudden, about June 1st, caught fire. Last half of the season, 122 WRC plus, over 20 homers, and essentially really had an outstanding year. Came to spring training last year. I think the both of us were so alarmed at how poor he looked swinging the baseball, how little hard contact he was making, and like he had lost everything he had gained in 2023. We saw it almost immediately, and it never changed. I don't care how well you tell me he swung the bat after he came back from Toledo. Never really felt great. Still a lot of not sure, don't trust him, fielded a little bit better. But look, we're going into year 4. It's now or never. And I think when you're a playoff team, it's really almost heresy to not upgrade the position. If you're going to trust Spencer Torkelson, you deserve what you get. And it hasn't been much for 3 years. It's been 3 months of good play and, that's all you've got. So it is what it is. My father used to tell me, don't tell yourself a story. I think the Detroit Tigers have been telling themselves a story about Spencer Torkelson for a really, really long time. And, nobody wins afraid of losing, baby. So time for the Tigers to at least do some things to protect themselves. What Scott Harris likes to refer to as calculated risk. It's just that he never does anything that seems to be calculated risk. We got a great guest today, pretty famous one, Dan Szymborski from FanGraphs, a writer, also the creator of the ZiPS projection system. I did about a half hour with him, talked about what projects for the Detroit Tigers at all positions and their pitching staff in 2025. We'll be back with Dan Szymborski in a minute.
I'd like to welcome Dan Szymborski, senior writer for FanGraphs and the developer of the ZiPS projection system, to the Days of Roar podcast for the first time. We are going to talk about just that, the ZiPS projection for the 2025 Tigers. Dan, thanks for joining.
Well, thanks for having me, Evan. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Working through a move right now with my wife, so it's been busy, but we're chugging along.
Well, it's better than moving during the season. At least there's no baseball and no real news going on at all at this very moment.
At least not right now for the Tigers, but you know how it is as a beat writer, right? Like you're on the clock always. If the Tigers sign somebody in 5 minutes, then I got to write up the story. So kind of always on high alert, but at the same time, we're trying to make the most of our time and get as much as we can done. But I want to dive right into the ZiPS projection. What can you tell me about the ZiPS projection system? What is it? You're the founder of it. When did it come to be? What does it all entail? And what does it kind of help us understand as we look ahead to the 2025 season?
Well, ZiPS is a very large, ever-growing, unwieldy set of algorithms that I've developed over the last 20 years. It started from a conversation in the late 90s with a friend of mine named Chris Dial. He later did some of the Gold Glove stuff with Sabre. We didn't do anything at the time. And then about 2002 came and I got the idea of doing a projection system. I kind of put it together. I never expected it to be useful. And it turned out to be, to my surprise. I didn't expect this was an experiment that I was going to be working on for half my life now. And it basically is to get a kind of a basic idea of what the future looks like for a player. The future is very uncertain. We're just trying to peek through the fog just a little bit. ZiPS works by comping players to large cohorts of similar players, seeing how they aged. And there's a lot to go, and I could probably talk about that for an hour, but those are the basics of what ZiPS is trying to do.
So when it comes to ZiPS in the 2025 Tigers, what are you seeing? It seems like right now it's projecting the Tigers to be about a 500 team. Is that how you're seeing it? And then also, too, when it comes to the AL Central as a whole, what do you think about some of the other teams in that division? What is ZiPS telling you?
There are times I disagree with ZiPS, but I think I'm kind of on the same page there. There are a lot of interesting things about the Tigers, but there are still some holes in the lineup. There's still, you look at the back of the rotation and think about the team's health and whether that is enough. You kind of miss kind of a real number two, like in Jack Flaherty, who obviously wasn't there the whole season, but when he was there, he was very useful. It's a team that still needs some work, I think. And the good thing about being in the AL Central is that you don't really necessarily have to put together a 95-win team. You're not trying to topple the Dodgers or the Yankees or the Braves, Phillies. It's a division where no one is going to be super aggressive. So the Tigers do have incentive to be aggressive. Now, nothing's happened, but we'll see.
So when you look at the Tigers as a whole right now, where do you see, okay, they need to upgrade here, and here, let's just say. Like if you look at the ZiPS projection and you see how different guys are projected out, whether it's the rotation, the bullpen, corner outfielders, corner bats, up the middle defense, the catching position. When you're looking at the projection as a whole, where do you say, oh yeah, they could really make a big step forward if they just address this one situation or this other situation? What do you see there?
I think adding one significant power bat would be extremely helpful to the current situation right now. Obviously, left field and center fielder are in a good situation. Parker Meadows, I'm a lot more confident about than a year ago. But I do think that when you look at them, that they do need a right fielder. They do, a better platoon mate to Kerry Carpenter. But that's not quite as big as crucial a thing since he is the big half of a platoon. And as I said, I think they need just this kind of middle rotation inning eater guy. No one who's great, but someone who you could confidently throw 160 to 180 innings most years, because that was something that was pretty useful in the playoffs if they had that. Because as anyone listening to this knows, they kind of ran out of starting pitchers and had Scooble and then tried to pretend that other pitchers existed with the use of the bullpen. I think that is a priority. But it wouldn't take much for the Tigers to, be near the favorite of the AL Central, because every team in the AL Central is kind of weak-ish.
You mentioned playoffs and starting rotation and starting pitchers and, the bullpen, the way the Tigers use their pen, specifically down the stretch to be able to piece things together and get to the postseason after trading Jack Flaherty at the trade deadline. I mean, you are the king of the ZiPS projection system. Could you have ever predicted the Tigers did what they did going on that 31-11 run to clinch and just making it to the playoffs, winning a playoff series against the Houston Astros. Like, with what they had, how improbable was that? Can you help me put that into words?
Oh, it was extremely unlikely. I had the playoff probability, not as bad as the FanGraphs depth charts did because I have wider bars, but I had it under 1%. If I had an inkling that was going to happen, I would have been placing some pretty big bets in Vegas, and I'd be living on a sugar plantation somewhere. It was a surprise. It was a fun surprise. I like fun surprises. Fun surprises are way better than nasty surprises. And they got decently far in the playoffs, patching games together with that bullpen. I'm not sure how much longer it could have lasted if they made it to another series or two. If they had made it to the World Series, I think they would have killed their bullpen by that point. But it was a fun ride. And I mean, it didn't end with the World Championship. I don't think anyone could really be dissatisfied with the season based on how it ended.
And then also wanted to ask you too, AJ Hinch, manager of the Tigers, the way that he mixes matches with the bullpen is one thing, but with the lineup too, in platoon splits and putting guys in situations where, they can take advantage of a matchup. Like, how rare is that? How fun is that to see? And I guess too, when you look at a team as a whole and your roster building, right? What are some of the advantages and disadvantages to relying on platoon type matchups as opposed to having a set it and forget it type lineup like maybe AJ had, with the Houston Astros when he was finishing up his tenure there? Now it's not the same here in Detroit. What are some of the advantages and disadvantages of that?
Well, one of the disadvantages, of course, is that there are limited roster spaces these days. Even with a 26-man roster, when teams are carrying 12 and 13-man bullpens, you don't have room for these big benches. So it's hard to have a platoon unless you have enough spots and you have just the right number of secondary players. And the Tigers do. They have a number of players who are surprisingly versatile, which is what makes that work. You have to have those guys, like Chris Taylor with the Dodgers is one of those players who's not really great anywhere, but you could kind of put him most places in an emergency, which allows you to kind of shift guys around. I guess Ben Zobrist is the platonic ideal of that kind of guy. The Tigers did a very good job there. I've talked about that with Hinch. If I had been an AL Manager of the Year award voter, I would have voted for Hinch. I was a little surprised he didn't win. I thought he had more of a challenge than the Guardians did. But again, I voted in a different award, not that one, so I can't really complain too much. It was a good performance. And I think that if we had voted for the Manager of the Year after the playoffs, I think there's a chance he might have given that performance, might have gotten a few more votes, but I don't want to speak for other people.
For sure. Again, we're talking to Dan Szymborski, senior writer for FanGraphs. Dan, when the projection comes out and you guys put this out and you put it out on your Twitter, now known as X, but formerly known as Twitter, when you put it out, everybody sees a graph, and these graphs have numbers on them. The starters, and you list Tarek Skubal, Reese Olson, Casey Mize, Alex Cobb, Jackson Jobe, so on and so forth. Same with the relievers. And then for the diamond, there's the diamond, and you see Riley Green's in left, and Parker Meadows is in center field with a little bit of Matt Vierling underneath that. And then you got Wenzel Perez in right and Matt Vierling in right as well. Can you walk us through how that design gets put together? And then also, what do those numbers mean? Can you break that down for our listeners?
Well, basically, it's just projecting the wins above replacement for them that the team is expected to get from the primary players at the position based on the FanGraphs depth charts at this point of the season. I'm more conservative once I start simulating the season when we get a little farther in after usually late January after all the zips are in. I'm more conservative with the playing time. I think we tend to be a little too optimistic with some of the pitching, and that goes for everyone, not just the Tigers. When you see like Garrett Crochet with 180 projected innings or something, or pitchers have a lot of injury risk. So like we have Skubal 199 innings. That's probably above what an average should be just because there's inherent risk in every pitcher. But I use the depth charts and I prorate the WAR to those numbers at this point of the season just to make a handy little graphic that people can look and reference. For WAR, for people who aren't familiar with the scaling, 2 is about a league average player. 4 is considered all-star. Once you get up into 6 and 7, you're talking MVP candidacy. Replacement level comes from the concept that an average player has value in baseball. It's pretty hard to deny both, direct evidence and implied evidence from how teams are run that average players have significant value. So it would be weird to peg everything to average. But at the same by the same token, there's a point where someone has no value. If you put me on a roster, I'd be, a 46-year-old pitcher with about a 68 mile per hour fastball. I would have zero value. So somewhere between me and an average player, there has to be a kind of baseline zero somewhere. And that's, there's a lot of ways to peg that. FanGraphs and Baseball Reference kind of came to an accord a few years ago to set a replacement level team at 47.7 wins. And WAR is a framework. It's not perfect. It's not magical. There are errors in it, but it does provide a good basic one number comparison that you can use to kind of get a big picture look at a team.
When you are taking a big picture look at the 2025 Tigers, where do they stack up from a WAR standpoint? And then also, what is the optimal WAR to get into the playoffs? Like, when you're looking at what's a playoff team, what's their WAR, what should that number be? And then where are the Tigers at now? Are they close to that, or are they pretty far off?
Well, generally speaking, there's no hard and fast rule. I look about 40 WAR is kind of where you want to be, because then you're talking an 87, 88 win team somewhere around there. And that's a team, especially with 3 wild cards, that has a really good shot at the playoffs. When you have 40 wins, 40 WAR, there's a lot you could do to add to the team. And every win from that point on drastically increases your probability of making the playoffs. I have the Tigers. Now it's ZiPS, so might be wrong, might be high, might be low. Has them at about 34 WAR right now. So you're looking at, you ideally want them to probably get, 6 WAR or more left. It's probably not as big a deal in the AL Central, but I think you do want to add a 3 or 4 win bat. I'd love to see Alex Bregman on the team. I'd love to see, Teoscar Hernandez on the team. Guys like about that level. The Tigers could literally sign both and still be well under $200 million in luxury tax with benefits. Obviously, they're not going to be as big a spender as they were under the previous regime when he was around. I do think it's an imperative, and I think that they should do that.
Do you have any thoughts on Alex Bregman and why he'd be a good fit for the Tigers?
I think that you look at the roster and they do have options at third base. But again, you only have so many good players available in free agency, so you don't necessarily get the exact fit for your team. I think that letting Jace Young play in the minors, see how it rolls out, see how Colt Keith's defense holds up at second base, have Bregman at third, and then perhaps you could use some of the flexibility that some of these players have, because Young is at third base, but it doesn't mean that he necessarily has to always play third base on the Tigers. I think that there is value in these flexible players, and that is a way they can contribute while they're breaking in. I think a corner outfielder would be ideal, but it's also not a particularly deep market for corner outfielders. I think, generally speaking, you try to get the talent you can, and then juggle that around them. I would certainly have a player like Young have some time in left and right in the minors this year. I know he's played third. He came up as a second baseman, I believe. Probably stretched as a shortstop, but that's not necessarily crucial given the roster as it currently stands. Just get the talent in there and then figure out how to deploy it later. Hinch is going to be good at that sort of thing.
Tarik Skubal, got to talk about him. What'd you take away from his 2024 season, winning the American League Cy Young Award? How does that factor into his ZiPS projection for 2025? And is there a chance he repeats based on what the numbers look like?
Oh, well, ZiPS projects him to be the best pitcher in baseball, so that's a pretty good chance he'll repeat. I mean, there were always things to like about him. He finally had, you looked at him at the second half of 2023, and there was a lot to like there. But he did it in 24, even better. He stayed healthy the whole time. And that's always going to lurk kind of in the back of your mind, like with any pitcher, because that's what pitchers are. But he despite any ifs and buts, he's probably the pitcher that you think has the fewest ifs and buts. So obviously, if you can extend him, now is the best time to do it. I don't know if they will, because he's not going to be cheap. But that's a problem for future Tigers to figure out.
I guess so. Hey, another one, you mentioned extension. I don't know if they're going to actually get an extension done with a guy like Riley Green, but should that be something that is maybe on the horizon that fans should be watching for? Is Riley Green a legit guy? Is he somebody that could be a, multi-time All-Star potential MVP winner? Or do you think he's a little bit below that level at this point, even though he did just make the All-Star game last year?
He's a 4 or 5 win player right now, and people forget he's still really young. He only turned 24 at the end of the season. He could still have some growth left in him. Probably not going to add a lot more average because players don't really add a lot of average as they age these days. But he could be, a 30, 35 home run hitter. And all of a sudden, that's a pretty darn good player. And the fact is, teams will, when they have guys like him, they will try to extend them before they hit free agency. And as a result, there are fewer and fewer star players available in free agency than there used to be. You go back 20 years, there were a lot more options in free agency. Now teams will sign these guys. And if you lose a player like Riley Green, you're not necessarily going to be able to replace him very easily. Like if Skubal was a free agent this year, what do you do to replace him? Well, someone as expensive and as good as Skubal. And there are not really that many options out there. I think that when players are foundational, you want to sign them early and often.
Obviously, we saw Jackson Jobe getting a taste of the big leagues, last season. Came up as a reliever. Of course, the Tigers are going to start him. He's probably going to be on the opening day roster from everything that I've heard. What do your projections say about Jackson Jobe? And how good could he be in year one? Or do you think it might be more of a developmental learning year for him in the big leagues?
ZiPS actually has him slightly below average, but that's also a pretty good projection for a really young pitcher who still has only like a couple games above AAA. Or above AA in AAA. I think he's got a lot of potential. His long-term projections are solid. And, I'm always a believer in when you believe in a player, talk extension with them. That's one of the keys going back to Cleveland, when John Hart was the GM. He kept that team together by signing them very early. The Rays do that. They got Evan Longoria for a lot longer than they would have had otherwise because they were aggressive with a player they believed in. And if you believe in a player, you should invest them and make sure that you will get the benefit of their services for a long time beyond their sixth season in the majors.
So I'm not asking about an extension here, but I am asking if you believe in this player. Spencer Torkelson, are you in or are you out?
I'm kind of out. I think he's going to be okay-ish, but 2024 was such a bad season. And this was kind of a key developmental season that he showed a lot of progress in 2023, especially late in the season. And it's getting harder to say he's a young player. He's just drafted in a COVID season. He's now had 3 full seasons in the majors, more or less, and he was just pretty terrible last year. If the Tigers could find a better option, I think that you go with it, but I'm not terribly optimistic about Torque.
The shortstop position, Trey Sweeney, Javier Baez, what do the ZiPS projections say about those two players in particular? And could a platoon of some sort where Trey Sweeney, as a left-handed hitter, is playing against the righties, Javier Baez, a right-handed hitter, is playing against the lefties? Does that make sense to you on a whiteboard, or would you like to see them do something else at the shortstop position? Maybe give more time to Trey Sweeney, or just look in a different direction as a whole? Obviously, a lot of money tied up in Baez. Or what do you think there at that spot?
It's so weird to see like a platoon shortstop. I think that on a fundamental level, I don't really trust Baez against any kind of pitcher these days. I kind of would want to try to give Sweeney the first shot at the full-time job. Baez is kind of a sunk cost at this point. Maybe you could keep him around because he can't play multiple positions. He has in the past. He is decent defensively at multiple positions. But my inclination would be to give the job to Sweeney, let him sink or swim, let him face, lefties. Batters never, learn to do something by not doing it. That was the problem with like Ryan Klesko early in his career. The Braves never let him play lefties against lefties, and he didn't hit them well. When he got to the Padres, they let him, and he improved. I think that Sweeney is someone who's likely to contribute to the Tigers in the future, and Baez isn't. So I would prioritize seeing what Sweeney could do.
What do you think about Trey Sweeney then? Are you in on him, or are you kind of out on him in the sense that, yes, solid defensively, but at the same time, like a lot of question marks with the offense. Average wasn't great last year in his limited sample. A lot of strikeouts. Like, are you think he's gonna, take a step forward, or are you worried that, what we saw from Trey Sweeney last season is going to be kind of who Trey Sweeney is?
I guess I'm still kind of in the middle somewhat. I think that his glove is good enough that it will keep him getting a shot, and you don't need a massive amount of offense from him. But he's not a great offensive player at this moment. ZiPS and Steamer both kind of seem as like a mid 600s, 675-ish OPS guy, which isn't ideal, but it's average-ish, and it's someone that you play and you see what he can do. And if in a few years he's not panning out and you have a better option, then you're not necessarily so. You don't have to put a ring on his finger, let's just say, but you do want to kind of see how these dates go.
No doubt. Hey, when Javier Baez has a 516 OPS, you'll take anything you can get from Trey Sweeney. But to move on to Kerry Carpenter, I want to ask about him, somebody that you guys in your projections, you have him slotted in as the designated hitter. I mean, that's roster resource for sure, but also he's going to play a lot of DH. He's also going to play a little bit of right field for sure. How much, though, is the value from a WAR standpoint? How much is that limited by the fact that he is more of a DH-only type player, even though he will dabble and play some right field?
It kind of keeps him around the 2.5 wins, which is someone that helps the team. He's a very good situational player. And I mean, and platoons have a long history of working. The Yankees for a long time had a platoon between Hank Bauer and Gene Woodling. And Carpenter is kind of the big spoon in the platoon because he faces the righties. He's not someone that you can call a star simply because of his limited usage, but in the right situation where you have enough roster spots and you have a righty bat to kind of pair with him, and he's a pretty solid guy to have who pushes the team towards the pennant. I don't have any complaints about Kerry Carpenter. It's just that he's not going to be a 4 or 5 win player as a platoon player, and he's probably going to be a platoon player. He's not probably going to play, a decent amount of defense. I wouldn't, categorize him as just a DH, but he's not going to be a tremendous defensive player. You're not going to put him in center field anytime soon. No, I don't know. Teams have done some weird things, but I think that he's he's not one of the problems with the Tigers, which I say.
No, not at all. And I'm not saying he is either. He absolutely rakes against righties and as a left-handed bat in the middle of that order. Kerry Carpenter is as dangerous as they come against righties. If you go look at the numbers and how he stacks up, I mean, he's up there top 5, top 6, top 7 in the league based on the number of plate appearances that he got last year. So Kerry Carpenter, not a problem at all. Just curious how maybe his value could be limited by the fact that he's not playing in the outfield every day like a Riley Green or Parker Meadows. And so, yes, maybe that caps it a little bit, but sky is the limit for Kerry Carpenter with the bat. When you look at Cole Keith is a guy that the Tigers did extend. He got a contract extension. He got paid before his MLB debut. What did you see from him in year 1? And what could year 2 bring for Cole Keith, who has talked about wanting to get into more power? He wants those home run numbers to go up.
I was a fan of the Keith extension. That's the kind of thing I like to see teams do. I even wrote about it, I believe, or I'm hallucinating that I wrote about it. You do. It's still kind of an unknown in a sense because he had basically 2 big months in 2024, and he struggled a lot of the other time with the bat. You want to see more consistency. And it's still hard to gauge just how good a defensive player he is. He's one of those players. There was significant disagreement among defensive measures. StatCast's outs above average had him pretty average, while the Sports Info Solutions measure had him not particularly good. I think that it's not a situation where you say, okay, well, he's a left fielder now or anything, but it is something to watch. I think that working on the defense, improving the consistency is probably a little more urgent than adding power. I think if you're more consistent, you will add that power just naturally and not necessarily to focus on it. But again, I'm not really a hitting coach. That's kind of out of my analytic wheelhouse.
I want to talk about Alex Cobb. The Tigers signed him to a 1-year, $15 million contract. The deal can be worth $17 million because there are $2 million worth of bonuses that he can unlock with innings pitched. What do you think about the Tigers going out and getting Alex Cobb, and what do the projections say about what he can be in 2025, coming off of a broken year in 2024 because of injuries?
The thing about Cobb is always the injury risk. It looked pretty brutal when he was back with the Orioles several years ago, but he kind of got his splitter back, which was what was missing when he came back from surgery with the Orioles. I like adding him because he's talented, but as I said, I also think the Tigers need some certainty in their arms. There are only so many injured arms you can have. The Dodgers have kind of mastered this kind of thing where they have accumulated a lot of very fascinating arms with concerning injury histories, But as we've seen from the Dodgers, you sometimes have to have 8 to 10 of those guys just accumulated over the roster just to have enough to make 5 starters at any point. And as we saw in the postseason, the Dodgers did not have that at some point. It's pretty impressive that they won the World Series with basically 2.5 starters they could count on. So I think that he does add something to the Tigers because he is a very good pitcher when he's on. But I also think they still need the guy who can eat the innings, and I don't want to necessarily count on Cobb to do that.
I asked you about Spencer Torkelson earlier, and I said, are you in or are you out? Torkelson, a former number 1 overall pick. Let's ask you about another former number 1 overall pick, Casey Mize. Are you in or are you out?
I wouldn't say I'm in because there's a risk with, he's had a lot of setbacks in his career, let's just say. But I think he's shown enough at times, and his peripherals were better than his ERA in 2024, that I am interested in him because I think if he stays healthy, he could be kind of that average inning eater type, but I still want them to add someone.
For sure. So, hey, the guys that these pitchers are going to be throwing to, I noticed, and it jumped out to me on the graphic that you shared, with the wins above replacement listed, beside each player at each position. Jake Rogers and Dylan Dingler, 3.2 WAR. I'm assuming that's combined. That seems pretty impressive. Where do those guys stack up from a catching tandem standpoint amongst others in the league? And how much of a value position is that for the Tigers at this point?
Well, the thing about the catching position in baseball is that there are not a lot of big superstars at that moment. You go back 15 years, there were a lot more guys who you can say, oh, these are stars. That was kind of like, the end of Ivan Rodriguez's career. There were a lot of catchers there. Now, teams are focusing on things like framing. You see a lot more tandems than you used to. The inning totals for the top catchers has gone down consistently over the years. The guys like Real Muto are kind of becoming the exception rather than the rule. Now, Rogers, his bat's been up and down in his career. He's had some injuries, but he's also a good framer. He doesn't get the stolen base game doesn't get out of control. He's a good above average catcher, even though it's not really all that sexy. A lot of people are kind of fighting about the catchers in my Twitter feed right now. I don't know why I'm still being tagged in, but it is what it is. Dingler is interesting because he didn't hit it all in the majors, but he hit pretty well in the minors the last couple seasons, even when you take into consideration that minor league offense is still really inflated compared to the majors right now. So I don't obviously think that he's going to, be the exact same as the next. Like when I talk about Patrick Bailey, obviously I don't think Dingler is going to be Bailey because Bailey's terrific. But Bailey was a catcher who in his first season in the majors didn't really hit it all. And he did show a little more power this season, although that kind of slumped towards the end of the year. But I think that there is a little bit of offense in Dingler. And if that should come to pass, then all of a sudden Dingler and Rogers is a really, really good combo. And only really bested by some of the players who are kind of the whole package, like Adley Rutschman, who will have a better season. And there's only a few of those guys to go around, the Rutschman, the Will Smith, and the Real Muto of a few years ago. I like the catcher situation. I don't think it's something that the Tigers really need to worry about. There are other things to do.
We're talking about the catcher position at home plate. Let's go all the way out to center field and talk about Parker Meadows. How impressed were you with what he was able to do, especially coming back from the injured list and coming back from his demotion when he went down to AAA Toledo? He came back up and, he had that injury and then really from there just absolutely took off coming back throughout the end of the season. I asked you earlier, like Kerry Carpenter, how much is his value limited by the fact that he's going to be, DH more often than maybe he's going to be in right field? For Parker Meadows, like how much of the value is there when you say, okay, this is a guy that not only is he going to be a hitter in our order who may or may not produce, but he is playing elite defense in center field every single day. How much value does that add to a guy like Meadows?
It adds a lot. It gives him a really high upside. Obviously, if you prorated his 2024 performance to, 600 plate appearances, you're talking a 4-win season, which is all-star level. I don't want to necessarily go and say that's the baseline, but he's a plus glove. He was someone that coming up, it was expected he would play good defense and be fast. Generally as a prospect, his power was kind of liked, but he was considered kind of a low batting average guy. And he hit 244, but that's not actually low average these days. He's shown enough offense that he could kind of be maybe Kevin Kiermaier in a different package. a little better offensively than Kiermaier was at his peak, a little worse defensively. And that's a really good player. I mean, Kiermaier was valuable for the Rays for a long time. I think center field, as with Green and left, that it's just not a worry. Obviously, you don't lose him to injury, but that's always a risk. His glove will keep him valuable even if he struggles offensively.
That's great to hear. For the bullpen, you got 4 guys who are locked in as of now. We have Jason Foley, Bo Brisky, Tyler Holton, Will Vest. What can you tell me about those guys as the anchor of the bullpen? But then also, who falls in line after them? How do you kind of see the Tigers constructing their bullpen as they look forward to 2025, considering they have those 4 guys locked in, but then they got to fill other spots?
Well, the front 4, as I said when I wrote about them, it's one of the best front 4 in the majors. There's very little concern about that. I think after them, I suspect that it's still rather up for grabs. I mean, Alex Lang is recovering from ab surgery, and he's expected, I believe, you might be more up to this than I am. I believe that he's expected to be ready at least at the start of spring training to go at least mostly. I don't know if that's accurate, but that was the last I heard about it, which might have been like a month ago.
Yeah, it was a lat injury that he had, and then he obviously got surgery on it. And yeah, the thought is that he'll be ready to go.
Yeah, I obviously he's had some issues with walks in recent years, but I think he does have quite a bit of upside. He misses bats, and a pitcher like that will always get another chance. He did have a good first strike percentage in 2024, which is actually a leading indicator of future walk rate. So that's actually promising. So if you add him in, they're 5. And I think that the Tigers are going to kind of see who looks the sharpest in the spring, because there are no obvious guys that just scream. I think you'll have kind of some of the spare parts, some of the guys who they can't really use in the rotation. Like Maeda is still under contract. I don't think he's going back in the rotation anytime soon. He's going to be in long relief. You have a number of guys like that. ZiPS kind of has a fascination with Brant Herter, which is interesting, and he did pitch pretty solidly in very limited time in the majors in 2024. I'm very, very positive about the bullpen. You probably don't need to do much. I think the problems with the Tigers are more obvious. It's just most teams could use an extra reliever, and it never really hurts to have another arm in the back of the bullpen. But I don't think it's a priority for the Tigers.
I need to ask you about a couple prospects before we let you go. I'm reading through the article on the Tigers about the ZiPS projections, and I'm seeing batters, top near age offensive comps. And then I look down that list at Kevin McGonigle. And then I look and I say, okay, who's hit comp number 1 for Kevin McGonigle? Alex Bregman. Tell me about the offensive comps. Tell me about what you see there when it comes to Kevin McGonigle and Alex Bregman, and maybe what ties those 2 players together. Tigers fans, I hope you're listening. Kevin McGonigle being compared to Alex Bregman.
I would say don't get too excited about individual comps. The idea is ZiPS is comparing him to a large cohort of similar young shortstop, second baseman, third baseman in the minors. In the minors going back to 1960 and the majors going back to 1920. And Bregman is in that group. But that doesn't mean at the time that he was necessarily Alex Bregman. Yeah, he was a first round pick, but at that point in his career that he's being compared to when he's, 2021, he was, just coming out of college. He was playing in the California League and recently for the California League. It didn't really all come together until he played for I think it was Corpus Christi at the time, the following year. So most players in that situation won't become Alex Bregman. It should be thought of as a possibility.
Okay, well, hey, here's another possibility, though. Here's another possibility, because you go down that list a little bit and you see the name Max Clark, and you look at hit comp 1 for Max Clark is Johnny Damon. I understand. It could happen, maybe, but walk me through that a little bit. Like Max Clark, Johnny Damon, what do you see? And after talking about Kevin McGonigle, Alex Bregman, like, could Alex Bregman and Johnny Damon, like, is that Kevin McGonigle and Max Clark in a perfect world? Like, is that what you're telling me?
I think, well, in a perfect world, yeah, you could say that. And I think it's less crazy for Max Clark because, one, he has played some in high A and he played very well in high A ball. He does have that speed. I think he actually showed a little more power than was expected. Obviously, he doesn't seem to be he's not going to be like a 30 home run guy. He's a line drive hitter who's going to, hit 15 home runs a year, but he showed he could get on base. He had a pretty good walk to strikeout ratio, I believe, in 2024. I wish I had it in front of me. So I could be lying, but I think Clark, and obviously he's generally speaking in the top 50 prospects for most viewers. He's one of the top or second best Tigers prospect, depending on who you ask. I think there is a good chance that Max Clark could be Johnny Damon someday. Not necessarily in 2025, but it is a possibility. Now, you can see from the other comps that they didn't all become Johnny Damon, but hey, it's not that crazy.
Hit comp number 2 for Max Clark, for everybody out there that wants to know, it's Colby Rasmus. So you're right. But again, Max Clark...
And Rasmus was a pretty solid player for a while.
For sure, but Colby Rasmus is not Johnny Damon.
Yeah.
And so Max Clark, maybe Johnny Damon, maybe Colby Rasmus. When you look at a guy like Kevin McGonigle, maybe it's Alex Bregman, or hit comp number 2, David Fletcher. Maybe it's a David Fletcher, right? So those are 2 different players, obviously, but
yeah, very.
but the upside there is tremendous for both of those players. I think that's what I'm getting at. I think that's what Tigers fans need to be taking notice of. Dan, is there anything else that stands out to you, whether it's the Tigers at the big league level, at the minor league level, any overarching takeaways from the ZiPS projection, or just your own thoughts in general on what this team looks like going into 2025, or what the farm system looks like going into 2025?
I think one of the things when you look at the Tigers is in a lot of ways they have more upside than the Twins or the Guardians or even the Royals right now. Because obviously the Royals got Bobby Witt Jr., but I think he's already hit his upside. But the Tigers have a lot of interesting guys who could be good. Colt Keith could be a star-level second baseman. Young could be. Max Clark in a couple years could be. Maybe Kerry Carpenter gets more time against lefties and hits them. I don't think that's likely, but Green has upside. Meadows has upside. The whole team really has a lot of upside. We even talked about Dingler. If he develops some offense, all of a sudden you're looking at a 4-win catching tandem. So I like the Tigers' upside more than some of these other teams, which are fairly conservative. And you look at they have a lot of high, low ceiling guys. Like I like Stephen Kwan in the Guardians, for example, but I don't think he has an MVP season in him. But there could be an MVP season in Riley Green. So that's one of the reasons I'm so vocal about the Tigers being aggressive, because you start to hit the upside on a couple of these guys and you've added a star. All of a sudden you're talking 91, 92, 93 wins and a team that can go against anyone in the playoffs, especially if they get that extra starter, because you're going to start every series with Skubal starting, and Skubal matches up against everybody. So I think the Tigers have a lot to like, but there's just a lot of work to do still.
All right, Dan, that's all we have for you. Thanks for joining and explaining everything there is to know about the ZiPS projection system and how the Tigers project in 2025. Thanks again for doing this. We'll have to get you back on at some point because this has just been outstanding.
Well, thanks for having me, Evan.
Everyone, that was Dan Szymborski, senior writer for FanGraphs. We have more to discuss about the Tigers, but first, let's take a break.
All right. That was a great interview with Dan Szymborski. Without getting too much into the weeds, if you want to be a playoff team, you need to aggregate 40 WAR. You start the year with 40 WAR, and you need to aggregate another 40 to become a playoff team. I think Dan's projections are a little over 37 WAR. I tweeted something yesterday. All it did was show that a 68-year-old man can't add, but I did a little adding on the phone and realized that Tigers are projected for, I think, 37.3 WAR. So I think he was a little shy in a few places, a little low on Colt Keith, a little low on Parker Meadows. So I'm right on the cusp of a playoff team based on those FanGraph projections, and projections are nothing but projections. All right, we're going to jump into the big elephant in the room. Question becomes, can the Tigers sign Alex Bregman? We're going to talk about this until Alex Bregman signs. So hopefully Alex Bregman will sign soon, because we've been talking about it now for about 12 shows in a row. Ev, the suitors are condensing. Who do you have on the dance card for Alex Bregman right now, and what are the Tigers' chances of being part of that mix?
Well, Alex Bregman is not going to be back with the Houston Astros. So that is a huge development. in the Alex Bregman, possibly to the Detroit Tigers situation, it's a huge development. Like the Astros acquired Isaac Paredes, then signed Christian Walker. That's your third baseman and your first baseman at the Houston Astros in 2025. And you already have Jose Altuve at second base. So Alex Bregman isn't going back to Houston, where he spent the first 9 years of his MLB career. As of now, you have the Boston Red Sox, New York Yankees, Detroit Tigers, New York Mets, Philadelphia Phillies. So many teams still possible for Bregman. So I don't want to get ahead of myself. But with the AJ Hinch connection and the Christian Nea friendship and the extremely low payroll the Tigers have, I think the door is wide open for the Tigers to sign Alex Bregman. And when I say wide open, I mean wide open, especially now that he's not going back to Houston. The Tigers weren't prioritizing Bregman at the beginning of the offseason, likely because they wanted to see how his market would unfold. But there's been an increase in the Tigers' prioritization of Bregman. We saw that between the GM meetings and the winter meetings. That was encouraging. More dialogue, more conversations, which means more of a possibility. And so when I look at it, I think it's definitely possible that Alex Bregman is a Tiger in 2025. We'll see where he ends up, but I think it's possible. And then when you look at the performance and what he brings, he's been worth more than 4 WAR in each of his past 3 seasons, with his combined 14 FWAR from 2022 to 2024, ranking 18th among 230 qualified position players. He has been the 18th best position player across the past 3 seasons. This is a guy the Tigers need to go out and get. Yes, there are some concerns about regression, and there's no doubt Comerica Park is not as good of a ballpark for Bregman's pull-heavy approach, especially considering he could mash at Fenway Park with the Green Monster. But if I'm the Tigers, I'd be willing to eat the final 2 years of the contract to get Alex Bregman for what he is right now. Or maybe you do a short-term contract, like a 4 or a 5-year deal, and pay him a ton of money. Mark, would you do 5 years, $200 million? It's not like the Tigers don't have money to spend, and we know Bregman wants a $200 million contract. Would you do 5 years, $200 million? How about 4 years, $180 million? Maybe the market crashes and you can get him for even cheaper than that. But for now, would you give him $40 million per year for 4 or 5 years? I think I would do that. That's just my opinion. I have no idea if the Tigers would do that. I have no idea if Alex Bregman would do that. But it's an interesting way to pay him what he wants without having to worry about the long-term contract and the obvious issues that come with giving a long-term contract to a player who's already 30 years old. But again, I think the door is wide open for the Tigers to sign Alex Bregman. I know the Tigers have interest in Bregman, and Bregman has interest in the Tigers, and there have been talks. So let's see if something happens coming out of Christmas, maybe between Christmas and the New Year. It's definitely possible. It's definitely a positive sign if you're the Tigers that Alex Bregman's not going to be going back to Houston, where he loves playing, he loves living, like he spent his entire career there, but he's not going to be going back to Houston. I think, again, I've said it a million times now, the door's wide open. But Mark, would you do something like 5 years, $200 million, or 4 years, $180 million? Or am I just crazy talking right now?
I think you're crazy talking right now. I think Alex Bregman is dealing with reality. Reality is nobody thinks he's worth more than $30 million a year. And I'm pretty sure nobody wants to give him $200 million. I think $200 million is just crazy talk now. So let's assess the suitors. And I think what Scott Harris is trying to do is he understands he's going to have to pay him a lot of money, but like anybody, he doesn't want to seem foolish. And consequently, I think this is how the suitors end up. I think right now at the top of the list of suitors for Alex Bregman is the New York Mets. Why? Because they're probably willing to pay him 6 years, $180 million if he wants to go there. The question is, will he want to go there? I think pretty much everybody else in the mix for Alex Bregman is, looking at 5 years, $160 million max, maybe, 5 years with a 6-year option, 27 plus million, 27 to 30 million bucks. So the Tigers want him. And what Alex Bregman's going to have to decide now is, who do I want to play with? The money's all the same. I mean, if it's a $5 or $10 million difference over 5 or 6 years after taxes, it's really not a lot of money. So the question is, where do I want to live? Who do I want to play with? Who am I going to trust to put a good team on the field? And what type of environment do I want to be in, especially the next 3 or 4 years? How much am I going to win? So if I'm the Tigers, that's the kind of sales job I'm going to do. Do I want to front load the contract a little bit and try to diminish the risk at the back end, maybe pay him a little more up front? Yeah, but who does that? Nobody does that. The Yankees just did that. Steve Cohen and the Mets can do that. Do I see Chris Ilitch doing that? Absolutely not. But the bottom line is they need to get AJ Hinch to do a sales job, make a competitive offer, and we'll see where it's at. I don't think the Tigers are at the top of the pile here. They're only at the top of the pile if Alex Bregman wants to play here. So at the end of the day, that's what we need to find out. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think they're at the top of the pile if Alex Bregman wants to play in Detroit, but they also could put themselves at the top of the pile if they spend some money to go out and get him. If they say, hey, this is the guy that we need, they can go out and they can put themselves at the top of that list and they can go sign Alex Bregman. Like, they have the money to do so. They have the payroll flexibility to make it happen. So it's up to them at this point, I think. Yes, like, it's a great fit. Like, he's got a close friend in Chris Chenea as the bullpen catcher of the Tigers. He has a connection in manager AJ Hinch. They were together in Houston. Again, Comerica Park is not a great place for Alex Bregman if he cares about his career-long numbers. If he cares about how many home runs he hits, how many doubles he hits, what things look like, maybe he's going to be looking at a place like Fenway Park if he cares about homers, right? Like, that might be a better place for him if he cares about that specific career number. But I don't know. I think the Tigers could definitely put themselves at the top of the list. That's why I said the door is wide open. Like, the door is wide open for the Tigers to pay up to get Alex Bregman. And I also think Alex Bregman probably has some interest in playing for AJ Hinch and being reunited with an old friend in Chris Chenea. So to me, on paper, it makes a whole lot of sense. We'll see if something actually happens.
All right. I wanted to ask you transition to one more player. You think Tigers have genuine interest in Kirby Yates or not?
I'm not so sure about that. I saw the report came out that there was some kind of interest there, and maybe there is, maybe there isn't. I think the Tigers do need to address, their high leverage situation in the bullpen. I think they need a closer, somebody who can miss bats and can pitch the ninth inning and rack up saves. Kirby Yates certainly misses a lot of bats, gets a lot of strikeouts. There's a lot to like there. There are other guys that I like as well. Andrew Chafin misses a lot of bats, and he's familiar, with the Tigers, and he's a left-handed reliever. And to me, that actually makes some sense. Kirby Yates, there are things that I don't like. It was a 15% walk rate in 2022, a 14% walk rate in 2023, and a 12% walk rate in 2024. So Kirby Yates, yes, he's going to strike a lot of guys out, but he's also going to walk a lot of guys as well. I don't like high leverage closer type pitchers who are going to issue a lot of free passes. That's never good, especially in the ninth inning in big moments. So Kirby Yates, are the Tigers interested? I'm sure maybe they've talked about him, but I haven't really heard anything substantial on that.
All right. Well, listen, Santa Petzold, time to get out of here. I want to remind everybody to please like, rate, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to Days of Roar, Apple, Spotify, especially YouTube. You can always find us embedded in every single Evan Petzold article at freep.com. I'd like to thank our editor, Nicole Avery Nichols. I want to thank a special Santa thanks to our producer, Robin Chan, the Magic Man. Love to both of my grandsons, especially the new little one. And I want to wish a special happy and Merry Christmas to the beautiful and spectacular Savannah Petzold. Until next week, Merry Christmas, everybody. Peace.